Imagine a queen so powerful, yet so despised, that her death was not only orchestrated by her own nobles, but followed by a fate so grotesque it became legend. September 28, 1213. The golden hues of autumn cloaked the Pilis forest in Hungary. The hush of the leaves belied the violence about to erupt. Among the towering oaks and whispering winds, Queen Gertrude of Merania rode at the head of a hunting party, clad in silk, adorned with gold, and blind to the sharpened hatred around her. She was not merely a queen consort. She ruled in her husband's absence, with a will as cold as steel and an ambition that rivaled any king's. But her throne rested on shifting ground. Whispers of betrayal haunted her court. Murmurs of land seized, power hoarded, and bloodlines displaced. Behind the trees, swords lay unsheathed in silence. The conspirators, Hungarian nobles embittered by years of humiliation, waited for the signal. What happened next would stain the forest forever. And the horror that befell her body? That's where the story darkens beyond imagination. She was born into ambition. Around the year 1185, in the alpine shadow of Bavaria, Gertrude of Merania entered a world steeped in bloodlines and dynastic power. Her father, Berthold IV, was no mere nobleman. He held the titles of Count, Margrave, and, through the favor of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, was elevated to Duke of Merania. Gertrude's lineage was soaked in imperial grandeur. But more than that, it was saturated with strategy. She was not the only one destined for greatness. Her sister Agnes would become Queen of France. Another Hedwig would later be canonized as Saint Hedwig of Silesia. But Gertrude, she was the one chosen to conquer the East. Sometime before 1203, Gertrude married Prince Andrew of Hungary, the ambitious youngest son of the late King Bela III. At the time, Andrew's political fortunes were uncertain. His older brother, King Emmerich, sat uneasily on the throne, while Andrew maneuvered in the shadows. Their marriage was more than a union. It was a move in a high-stakes game stretching from Bavaria to Byzantium. By Gertrude's side, Andrew joined the faction supporting Philip of Swabia in the volatile struggle for the German crown, directly opposing his own brother's allegiance to Otto IV. These foreign allegiances would plant the seeds of a deep cultural divide, a rift that would later tear open with blood. In 1203, emboldened and impatient, Andrew made his move. He rebelled against Emmerich in a failed attempt to seize the crown. Captured and imprisoned, Andrew's fortunes seemed dashed, but Gertrude did not fade into silence. She retreated to her family's court in Bavaria, waiting with an ambition that refused to die. Then history turned. In 1204, King Emmerich suddenly died, leaving behind a minor heir, Ladislaus III. 1 year later, that child too perished, under mysterious circumstances. With suspicious timing and a vacant throne, Andrew was released. The crown fell into his lap like a ripe fruit, and with it, Gertrude ascended as Queen Consort of Hungary. But unlike queens before her, Gertrude did not accept the shadows. She stepped into the light. While Andrew pursued military campaigns in Galicia and beyond, Gertrude ruled as regent, governing not with a gentle hand, but with the assertiveness of a king. Chroniclers of the time, like Dietrich of Apolda, wrote of her conducting the affairs of state like a man. In a medieval world that saw female power as a disruption of divine order, this was not praise, it was a warning. But Gertrude didn't just rule. She restructured Hungary to fit her image, and she started by replacing its nobility. With her husband away, Gertrude surrounded herself with German courtiers, men she trusted, blood she understood. Lands were redistributed, fortresses were handed over. Hungarian nobles, already suspicious of their foreign queen, watched in stunned disbelief as their influence eroded. In 1206, her younger brother Berthold was appointed Archbishop of Kalocsa, one of the highest ecclesiastical offices in the kingdom. It didn't stop there. By 1212, he was named Voivode of Transylvania, a military governorship so powerful it was typically reserved for the kingdom's fiercest Magyar lords. According to later accounts, Gertrude granted lands so generously that foreign courtiers controlled nearly a third of Hungary's wealth. Whether exaggerated or not, the perception of betrayal was real. In taverns and temples, nobles began to speak in hushed, angry tones. Gertrude, they whispered, was carving Hungary into a German colony. And yet, she held her head high. She appeared at court dazzling in silks, dismissive of her enemies, unafraid of the murmurs swelling around her. She was untouchable, or so she thought. Behind the pageantry, Hungary seethed. Noble families whose lands had been seized, whose voices had been muted, saw in Gertrude not a queen, but a usurper, and worse, a foreign one. Her court became a symbol of foreign interference, of disregard for Magyar heritage. The queen consort had become a wedge, splitting the nation apart. The whispers grew louder. Murmurs turned to meetings, and meetings turned to plans. By the early months of 1213, the storm was gathering. Gertrude's enemies, biding their time for nearly a decade, saw a chance approaching. King Andrew, once again preparing for a foreign campaign, would leave the throne, and the queen vulnerable. What no one foresaw was just how far the conspirators would go, or the monstrous final insult they would orchestrate after the queen drew her last breath. Because in the heart of Hungary, a queen was about to fall, and legend says her body would be consumed by beasts. Power breeds enemies, and Gertrude's Hungary was turning into a battlefield of silence and secrets. By 1210, the royal court in Buda was no longer just a place of governance. It was a pressure cooker. Gertrude, proud and unapologetic, continued to elevate her German entourage. Her court glittered with foreign accents, imperial fashions, and lavish feasts. But beyond the gilded chambers, Hungary trembled. Native nobles, once powerful stewards of the realm, were pushed to the periphery. Entire dynasties watched their ancestral lands handed over to strangers, their voices drowned in a chorus of German ambition. Behind closed doors, noblemen gritted their teeth. In smoky halls and candlelit chapels, they began to speak freely. "The queen is not our queen. She does not serve Hungary. She serves her own blood." To many, Gertrude was no longer a regent. She was a colonizer. Her brother Berthold, already Archbishop of Kalasa, had been named Voivode of Transylvania, a title that made him not just a religious figure, but a military commander over a vast and turbulent region. This appointment wasn't just political, it was inflammatory. It sent a clear message. This kingdom belongs to the Meranians now. But the real catalyst may not have been power. It may have been something far darker, a rape, a cover-up, and a queen's silent approval. A chilling rumor began to circulate among the Magyar elite. According to later accounts, one of Gertrude's brothers, some say Otto, had assaulted the wife of a Hungarian noble named Bankban, a trusted figure in the royal court. What stung even deeper, the queen allegedly knew, and she did nothing. Was it true? Historians remain divided. No contemporary source confirms the rape. But the rumor gained traction, surviving centuries, immortalized in plays and operas as the emotional heart of Gertrude's downfall. Whether fact or fabrication, the tale added a new layer of fury, a violation not just of political balance, but of personal honor. Bankban, once a loyal courtier, became a symbol of Magyar resistance. Around him, a coalition of the disgruntled began to crystallize. Among them, Peter, son of Turi, a powerful noble who had lost both land and dignity under Gertrude's reign. The queen's enemies were no longer merely muttering, they were organizing. By mid-1213, Gertrude was isolated in her own kingdom. Her husband, King Andrew II, had left for yet another military expedition, this time to Galicia, entrusting Gertrude once more with the regency. To her allies, it was a natural delegation. To her enemies, it was a fatal misstep. The conspirators saw their moment. For nearly a decade, they had watched and waited. Now the queen was unprotected, confident, surrounded by foreign guests, and far from the capital. All they needed was the perfect moment. And so, as the leaves began to turn and the autumn air thickened over the Pilis forest, a hunting party was arranged. Among the riders, Queen Gertrude, her brother Berthold, and Duke Leopold VI of Austria. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that their companions were not just hunters, they were executioners. It began with a royal hunt, but ended with screams that echoed through the forest and into history. September 28, 1213. The Pilis forest stood still under the weight of early autumn. Golden leaves fell like ashes, cloaking the forest floor in silence. Somewhere within, Queen Gertrude of Merania rode with her usual poise, the reins in her hand, her brother Berthold and Duke Leopold VI of Austria beside her. The hunt was supposed to be routine, but today the prey was not wild game. It was her. Among the entourage were Hungarian nobles, men she believed to be allies, if not loyal, at least obedient. But behind their quiet smiles, blades waited. Among them was Peter, son of Tori, the man many believed led the conspiracy. For weeks, the plan had been in motion. For years, the resentment had festered. Today, it would erupt. As the party ventured deeper into the woods, the air changed. There are no official records describing the exact moment of betrayal. No witness statements. No surviving confessions. But legends whisper of a sudden ambush, steel flashing in the dappled sunlight, guards caught off guard, and a queen thrown from her horse amidst chaos. She was dragged from the saddle. Shouts turned to screams, and then to silence. But it wasn't just murder. It was mutilation. Deliberate, symbolic, unforgettable. Sources diverge on the details. Some say she was stabbed dozens of times. Others claim her body was hacked apart, her limbs severed in ritualistic rage. Her attendants tried to intervene. Few lived to tell the tale. Berthold and Duke Leopold barely escaped, their survival attributed to their own horses or divine luck. The forest floor was soaked in royal blood. And then came the act that turned a political killing into legend. According to later accounts, none confirmed in official chronicles but passed down in the folklore of vengeance, the queen's dismembered body was abandoned in a secluded part of the woods. There, it is said, a sounder of wild boars found her remains. They devoured her. To the medieval mind, this wasn't just horror, it was sacrilege. In Christian belief, the body had to be preserved for resurrection. But pigs, filthy creatures, symbolizing damnation and corruption, eating the queen? It was a desecration of her soul, not just her corpse. That story, whether true, embellished, or fabricated, became a weapon of memory. It ensured that Gertrude would not be remembered as a martyred queen, but as an object of loathing. In the eyes of many Hungarians, her death wasn't a crime, it was a correction. Yet back in Buda, the halls of power trembled. King Andrew II was still away when word arrived. The nobles had not just struck the queen, they had struck the royal order. And now everyone waited to see how the king would respond. Would there be vengeance, justice, a reckoning? Or had Gertrude's downfall been more convenient than tragic for those who stood to gain? Because now in the wake of her death, new ambitions stirred, and not all of them belonged to men. Her blood had barely dried on the forest floor when the silence shattered, with rumors, reactions, and consequences that would ripple for centuries. When King Andrew II returned from his campaign and learned of Gertrude's assassination, the court held its breath. The murder of a queen consort was not merely a crime. It was blasphemy against the divine order of monarchy. But what followed wasn't the storm of vengeance many expected. Peter, son of Tora, the man believed to have led the plot, was executed. His punishment was public, symbolic. But beyond that, few of the conspirators were severely penalized. Some were exiled. Others returned to court life, quietly reassuming influence. The nobility whispered what no one dared say aloud. Had the king turned a blind eye? Or worse, had he silently approved? Because while Gertrude had been Andrew's wife, she had also been a political liability. Her domination of court affairs, her favoritism, the slow erosion of Hungarian aristocratic power, these had not only stirred noble resentment, they had perhaps unsettled the king himself. And yet Gertrude's shadow didn't vanish with her death, it deepened. In the years that followed, Hungary's internal tensions didn't dissipate, they calcified. King Andrew's power wavered. The nobles grew bolder. But one voice rising from the past would demand retribution not in days, but in decades. Their son, Bela IV, was just a child when his mother was murdered. But he never forgot. When Bela ascended to the throne years later, he carried more than a crown. He carried a vendetta. One by one, the descendants of the queen's killers saw their fortunes reversed. Lands were confiscated, titles stripped, Bela made it clear his mother's blood had not been shed in vain. And yet, the story of Gertrude did not end in vengeance. It was reborn in legend. In 1819, playwright József Katona reimagined her as Gertrudis in the patriotic tragedy Bank Bán, a tyrannical foreign queen who condoned her brother's rape of a Hungarian noblewoman. In this retelling, her death was not a political assassination. It was an act of national justice. Ferenc Erkel's 1861 opera adaptation would take the tale even further, turning Gertrude into a symbol of foreign oppression during Hungary's struggle under Habsburg rule. Audiences didn't just watch a queen die, they cheered as a traitor fell. But in these retellings, facts blurred. There is no concrete evidence that Gertrude sanctioned sexual violence. No record that Bank Bán, though a historical figure, played any role in her murder. These were inventions, designed not to reflect reality, but to shape identity. The Hungary of the 19th century used Gertrude's death as allegory, but in doing so, it also stripped her of humanity. Was she truly a villain, or merely a woman who refused to stay silent in a world that demanded her submission? The question lingers like mist in the forest where she died, because sometimes history doesn't just record, it condemns. And in the case of Gertrude of Merania, the line between justice and myth has never been fully untangled. Centuries passed, but the queen's shadow only grew longer and darker. Gertrude of Merania, once a flesh and blood woman of power and politics, had by the 19th century become a ghost story, a national villain, a cautionary tale draped in theater and ink. In Bank Bán, she was reimagined as Gertrudis, the cold, manipulative foreign queen who allowed her brother to rape a Hungarian noblewoman's wife. Her death in this retelling wasn't a political murder. It was retribution, poetic and deserved. Hungarian audiences cheered not because a queen had died, but because an oppressor had been brought to justice. The opera became a cultural anthem during Habsburg rule, a vessel for Hungarian nationalism disguised as medieval tragedy. But the truth? It's murkier, and perhaps far more tragic. There is no reliable evidence that Gertrude ever condoned sexual violence. The alleged rape of Bank Bán's wife, Melinda, appears nowhere in contemporary chronicles. The figure of Bank himself, though historical, was not named among the conspirators in any surviving document. These details were likely later inventions, designed to personalize a broader political grievance and heighten emotional stakes for stage and opera. What's clear is this: Gertrude favored her German kin. She used her position to empower her family. In doing so, she alienated powerful factions in a country already sensitive to foreign influence. That, in and of itself, may have sealed her fate. What if Gertrude wasn't a tyrant, but a woman ahead of her time? She took command in her husband's absence, issued political appointments, and played the game of power in a realm that demanded women stay silent. What her male counterparts called strategy, they called arrogance in her. What they called ambition in themselves, they labeled treason in her. And so, history turned her into something else entirely. Even the grotesque legend of her corpse, left in the forest to be eaten by pigs, became a metaphor more than a memory, a symbolic execution, a declaration. This is what happens to queens who forget their place. The transformation from Gertrude the regent to Gertrude the villain wasn't just literary, it was cultural. And it reveals a truth many societies prefer to forget. When a woman wields too much power, the knives don't just come for her body, they come for her memory. Her story, then, is not just one of medieval politics. It's a mirror. A queen who defied tradition, who was punished for her audacity, and who centuries later was still being rewritten, not to understand her, but to silence her. And that silence, it's the loudest echo of all. The forest where she fell is still there. North of modern-day Budapest, the Pilis forest whispers beneath its ancient trees. Among the crumbling ruins of the Cistercian Abbey of Pilis, where her body was said to be buried, silence lingers like a second skin. No monument stands tall in Gertrude's name. No statue watches over her grave. And yet her presence clings to the air like mist, haunting, unsettled. More than 800 years after her death, Queen Gertrude of Merania remains one of medieval Europe's most enigmatic figures. Not for what she did, but for what was done to her. Her assassination was more than murder. It was a message that no matter how high a woman climbs, if she threatens the wrong men, she can be brought down, brutally, publicly, and then erased. But the attempt to erase her failed. She left behind 5 children who shaped European history. Her son, Bela IV, would become one of Hungary's greatest kings. Her daughter Elizabeth, canonized as a saint, became a beacon of compassion and sacrifice. Another son ruled in Galicia, and her daughter Maria would ascend as Tsarina of Bulgaria. In blood, her legacy endured, but in memory she was twisted, first into a traitor, then into a monster. Today, historians still debate her motives, her rule, her guilt, but maybe the real question isn't whether Gertrude deserved her fate. It's why we still feel the need to ask. Because when a woman of power dies violently, history doesn't just remember, it chooses how to remember. And Gertrude of Merania was remembered not for her diplomacy, her regency, or her lineage, but for her death, for being devoured, literally or symbolically, by the forces she tried to command. Maybe she wasn't just a queen. Maybe she was a warning. So tell us, was she the villain of Hungary's past, or its most tragic victim? Let the forest decide. Let history argue. And let us never forget what was done to the woman who dared to rule.